You're listening to This Motorcycle Life, conversations about why we ride. Episode 25, The Best Laid Plans. I'm Bruce Philp. Thanks for listening. Well, have you ever wondered what it would be like, or maybe even been tempted, to throw it all away and hit the road forever? To have your take this job and shove it moment, put a for sale sign on the lawn, strip your life down to the bare essentials, and live on your bike? In a moment, you're going to meet someone who ended up doing just that, and discovered that there's a lot more to freedom than just having nothing left to lose. We'll get to his story in a moment. But first, let's take care of a couple of important pieces of business. First of all, I should warn you that I have had a bit of laryngitis this week. You'll notice it especially during the interview portion of this episode. I apologize if it's annoying to listen to, and hopefully it'll be solved before we get together again. As always, I am eternally grateful for the ratings, reviews, and emails that I receive from listeners. As you know, ratings and reviews help people find this podcast, and you can really see the difference they're making as the number of listeners grows. The emails, though, are what really keep me inspired. I was especially touched over the last few weeks by the supportive messages I received about and for Valerie Lauer, whom I spoke with in episode 24. It's been a powerful reminder not only of what a great community this is, but also of the tremendous and often invisible importance that motorcycles play in the lives of many, many riders. And my promotional message for this episode is dedicated to this podcast. Specifically, I've been thinking about writing a weekly newsletter, just a 2-minute read about motorcycle stuff that seems like it's worth celebrating. If that sounds interesting to you, let me know by signing up at thismotorcyclelife.com. I know there's a lot of competition for your inbox, and I won't promise you hot news or critical commentary, but if you like this podcast's take on motorcycling, maybe this will be worth finding some time for. It'll be free, of course, and I'm excited to hear what you think. Okay, let's get to our story. In some ways, I think my biggest flaw as a motorcyclist is my contentment. I'm pretty happy with my life, and I'm not really what you'd call restless in the usual sense of the word. There have been times over the years when, like a lot of us, I would have looked at the road as a means of escape, and at escape as a pretty sensible option. But now, for me, riding is more like a great whiskey, if you'll forgive the cliché. Not a means to an end, but an end in itself. Even with our short seasons in Canada, I'm on my bike more than 100 days a year, but it's not usually to get anywhere or away from anything, and on most of those days, that's more than enough. But this is the time of year for resolutions and plans, and maybe the time of year when our minds are most open to what else is possible on a bike. Even I'm not immune to passing a snowy evening looking at maps and watching YouTube videos or scrolling through that great catalog of biker lifestyles called Instagram. And it was there, in fact, amidst all the enthusiastic cosplayers and ambitious content creators, that the idea for this episode was born. Because it was there that I first met Wobbly Cat. Wobbly Cat is the nom de guerre of James Bai, who is a familiar face in Toronto's lively motorcycle community. Although he doesn't exactly live in Toronto. He doesn't exactly live anywhere, in fact, unless you count his motorcycle and a far-flung network of friends and fellow nomads. Wobbly Cat kind of lives everywhere. Before he hit the road, James Bai was a cubicle-dwelling engineer for a giant technology company, so he made this restless dream come true the only way he knew how, by planning it down to the last detail. Well, as you can probably guess, the road had other ideas. I caught up with James Bai in Toronto. Hey James, how are you doing?
Hi Bruce, I'm good. Thanks for having me join into your conversation here.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I really appreciate you making the time to do it. I've been following your story for a couple of years, I guess. And then we ran into each other at the Toronto Motorcycle Film Festival, and it just seemed like it was time for us to talk. So I'm really glad you could make some time for me. So Look, I got to tell you,
Yeah.
I have to say the life that you're living, is kind of amazing to me. But it also fills me with a weird blend of envy and terror because I'm kind of a homebody. So,
Okay.
so I have a million questions, and I imagine that's not a totally unique reaction. So, just as a heads up, I think we're gonna sort of divide this conversation into two parts. Kind of stuff about why you're doing this, and then stuff about how you're doing it. So, bear with me.
Sure. Sure.
Okay. So let's start with this. How would you describe your lifestyle, or the way that you're living right now? What words do you use to describe that?
I would call myself a nomad. And if you were to ask me more questions, then I would call myself a moto nomad. I travel at the moment exclusively on my motorcycle, and wherever I go, I bring just what I can carry with me on my motorcycle.
Right. I'm going to ask you about that because that is also amazing to me. We'll get to that a little bit later on. But tell me a bit about your life before you made this decision. I mean, you obviously, weren't born on a bike. At some point, you were a regular guy, or were you?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm regular by any stretch of the imagination. So I hit the road in 2016, and prior to that, I lived well, I guess you could call a normal lifestyle. I had a 9 to 5 job, had a regular income, married, and I loved motorcycles. And one of the things I loved to do, obviously, was to do motorcycle road trips. But in terms of what was life like prior to hitting the road, well, by education, I guess you could say I'm an engineer. I'm a engineering systems and computing engineer, and I had a job at IBM for 18 years,
Hmm.
and I worked in the office as in my own special cubicle, and I only say special because it wasn't special. It's just a cubicle, but it makes me feel better when I say that. And yeah, I was the role I had prior to leaving was a product manager, and I was responsible for what I would call these software products. Well, it's the products are kind of esoteric. The product that I developed was technical support, and I was responsible for the technical support portfolio in all of Canada. So I was but coming out of university, as I said, I was an engineer, so a bit of a nerd or a geek all the way through.
Right.
But yeah, getting back to motorcycles, because this is a motorcycle podcast.
It is.
I was very involved with the motorcycle community here in Toronto, and I tried to get out to as many meets as I could, as humanly possible. There's the big ones like Lakeshore and Leslie, and prior to me leaving, what was fairly new at the time was the Moto Social. But then they had Monday night dessert meets, and then with my other group of riders, we used to have these Friday night eat-and meets, and just almost every day you could probably head out to a motorcycle meet, and I loved doing that. So I guess the quote that people say, motorcycles are life. Well, I guess that was, and I guess you could still say, is me.
Yeah, clearly. Well, so I get the loving motorcycles thing. And I guess I can understand why somebody in a tech support role would want to run away and never come back. But, if you'll pardon the joke. But I guess I'm curious to know, did you always have that nomadic itch? Or was this something that just kind of erupted?
Well, that's a good question. And by the way, I've listened to your podcast for a couple of years now, and I'll probably say that again a lot today. The good question, because you asked a lot of good questions.
Thank you.
But even before I graduated university and I got married, my my girlfriend / fiance or whatever she was at the time, remembered me saying something like, one day I just want to hit the road and drive somewhere, right? And that was even before I started motorcycling. I started kind of late in life in my early 30s. But so I guess I always had that wanderlust in me from the beginning.
Yeah, it's interesting. It almost sounds as if bikes were a way to feed that, as opposed to the other way around. So I have to know. So I'm picturing you being this, engineer, guy in a technology business, sitting in a cubicle, living the life of a good citizen, paying taxes, nice house or apartment or condo, commuting back and forth, doing all those things that we do. So I'm super curious to know, in as much detail as you're prepared to share, what led up to the decision to hit the road? What were those conversations like, and what was that moment of decision like?
So my wife at the time, so this would be back in, wow, I guess it would have been like 2010 or 2011. Had it was actually her idea, to be honest. And she tried to convince me over the years, and I was like, no, that I don't really like that idea. I kind of like my life. But then eventually she kind of hit on a good point, saying, this could be like a motorcycle road trip that never ends, and I would be your support vehicle. And I'm like, oh, well, that actually sounds a lot better. So, whereas, the idea that was originally pitched was, let's hit the road in an RV, and we can take your motorcycle if you want. But when it's all about the pitch, it's all about the spin, right?
Right.
So after we agreed, and early on in my adult life, after university or whatnot, and getting married, starting a real job and all this stuff, we started investing in rental properties. So by the time we had made the decision to hit the road, we had a few rental properties, not a lot, like we definitely far short of an empire, I'll say, and north of Toronto. But anyways, and so we were able to use that, and and to be honest, like through the years, we had lived a fairly frugal lifestyle compared to a lot of our peers, and so we were able to have a 5-year plan in terms of looking at the financial numbers. Would our rental property income be enough to sustain our lifestyle? And the other side of that is, what do the numbers look like having a nomadic lifestyle? It's a lot of estimating and because you can't really tell until you hit the road, right? Mm-hmm. Luckily for us, there's this giant library, some even call it a super highway, called the internet, right? So there were a lot of people that live full time in RVs on the road that like to blog or make videos about them. So my wife did a lot of research and sort of came up with some rough numbers. And then we, as well, I suppose, when you launch or look at any product, you try to do some proof of concepts, right? So right. We did a number of trips, test trips, and sort of tried to estimate our expenses at the time to give us a little bit of a good estimate, a closer estimate. And the big variable was, of course, how much would we get for selling our house? Right. And so, in that way, we tried to time the market a little bit. And luckily for us, Toronto and the GTA seems to be a good place to own real estate. And so with the sale of our house, we were able to, and the income from our properties, we made the decision first, right? And then we sold our house, and, based on market value and stuff like that. So we felt that it was a good time to hit the road. And, one of the things that have always crossed our mind, in doing something like this is, none of us are getting any younger. We're only getting older, right? And like financially, it probably would have been better for us to put it off another 5 or 10 years to build a little bit more of a financial base, if you will. But there's so many different kinds of risks in life and in lifestyles. The biggest risk would be, as we get older, our bodies aren't as strong. We would be able to live on a lifestyle on the road, but 10 years later, we would be doing it a little bit slower with a little bit less energy. We wouldn't be able to do as many things that we could do if we were doing it now. So we're like, tomorrow is never promised, but today is. So it made more sense for us to hit the road sooner rather than later, and due to our conservative lifestyle and our building our long-term income, which was the rental properties, because those were always long-term. Like short-term, we didn't really include those in part of our regular income, so to speak.
Yeah. So interesting. So that was so a couple of interesting themes there. One was that you had to be talked into it, and the other is that although this is a a fairly passionate choice, it was actually very carefully planned out. That's not the way you usually imagine these things going. When people sit around and fantasize about chucking it all and living on their bikes. What did you hope to get out of all this? I mean, once you'd been persuaded to do it, and you pointed your bike down the road, what did you think was going to happen to you?
Well, I was just excited about not sitting behind a desk every day and not being, having so much stress from work. I was excited about riding my motorcycle more. I was excited about seeing more places, doing more things, being more active, spending more time outside, meeting new people, having new experiences, all the things that living what I'll call a sedentary or quote normal lifestyle,
right.
You only get like a couple of weeks of the year. But having said that, a lot of people when they look at my lifestyle, I kind of think that they think every day is a vacation. But living on the road and living nomadically, every day is not a vacation. There are a lot of things that that I have to think about or do or make decisions about that actually take a lot of my time. So it's not just fun and games every day.
Yeah.
Like I don't go to the beach every day and sip Mai Tais or whatever, or I'm not riding the tail of the dragon every day or whatever. I do those things. Don't get me wrong. And it's obviously what makes life exciting, but there's a lot of mundane things that happen as well behind the scenes.
Yeah, no doubt. I'm going to ask you a bit about that later because me being me, I think about tires and chains and stuff like that, as well as weather. But so back to the sort of moment of departure, I imagine it was hard to pack up your life like that. Tell me, just because I think people are going to want to put themselves in your shoes somehow. Tell me about the day you left, that moment you set off. So, your old life is kind of getting smaller in the rearview mirror. Obviously, you're not alone at this point, which we'll also get to in a minute. But the decision is in some ways irrevocable, and you're leaving. How did that feel?
So, there was a couple points of no return when you make this decision. The first one is selling your house, right? Because you can't unsell your house.
Right.
Secondly, is quitting your job. I mean, and yes, you can unquit your job, but I'd been there for 18 years, and it was like a very permanent type decision for me. Like, yes, I could have, gotten another job with another company or whatnot, but to me that was like a point of no return. But it actually, the day we sold our house, we left the house, that whole leaving scenario didn't pan out as we had planned. What ended up happening was, I'm trying to think about how much I can tell versus what I can't tell. So, okay, here we go. So when I left my job, I actually couldn't time it perfectly with the closing date of my house. So I ended up having to work at my job for a couple more months after our house had closed. So we ended up packing things up into the RV, and the way our RV is, just to explain this, is a little 17-foot travel trailer, and at the time, a Honda Odyssey minivan. And so we packed up our lives like we would have, hit the road, and lived in my sister-in-law's driveway in Brampton for a few weeks until my job was over. And then, so that took us to sometime in September. And I might as well mention now that there are certain time restrictions about, being in the U.S. versus Canada.
Right.
As a Canadian, we have, I think the number is 182 days maximum time that we can spend in the U.S. Per rolling 6-month period. So with that in mind, people or Canadian snowbirds typically cross into the U.S. on November 1st, which brings them to November, December, January, February, March, April, into about the April or May timeframe for them to return. Because if you come back too early, then guess what? It's Canada. It's still cold.
Right.
So, but anyways, so we couldn't cross till November. Well, we could have, but we chose not to cross until November 1st. But there's a lot of things going on with our rental properties that had just come up unexpectedly, and so we had to deal with that. So we ended up, instead of hitting the road directly, we ended up having to do some work at the rentals first, and then we ended up hitting the road. But at that point we driveway surfed at one of our rental properties. Sorry, when I say driveway surfed, I mean parked in the driveway with our trailer,
right,
and lived there for a little bit before we headed out. So
it's hard to get.
Oh, sorry. Let me go back.
Sure.
So your question was, what was it like in the rearview mirror when you left? All that to say, it wasn't smooth. It wasn't exactly how we planned it. But the final day when we packed up the minivan, packed up the trailer, packed up the dog, I'm on my motorcycle. Oh yeah, that's right. It had already snowed in October, the year 2016 when we left. And so we actually ended up having to time the weather, and it being Ontario, the weather's like all over the place. So we're like, well, it's cold now. Let's wait until it warms up again. And so we waited for a break in the weather, which was sometime during the first or second week of November, and then hit the road. But yeah, it was exciting because we had our excitement to leave had been pushed back, month by month, week by week, and then now it's finally here, and we're excited and nervous at the same time because this is something we've been planning for 5 years,
right? And
then where did we make? We made it our first night. We stopped in some small town in Pennsylvania. I can't even remember the town name. I have to look that up. But we were on our Canadian cell phone plans, and not that it mattered because coming through the Pennsylvania area, our signal was really, really bad. And I had, I called our travel style the tortoise and the hare. And I'm sure you can guess that I was the hare.
I was hoping.
The trailer is the tortoise, right?
Yeah.
But so I ended up being like way ahead of my wife, and no way to contact her because our signal strength was pretty poor. And even if I did get Wi-Fi, she may or may not have gotten it. So, as you know, this time of year, or rewind about 1 month, because that would have been about the same time frame that I would have left. When the sun goes down, it gets really cold. And when you're, at elevation a little bit, which is, when you're coming through the mountains in Pennsylvania, it gets pretty cold. So, anyways, I found some small little town with some random parking lot that I thought we could overnight in with the trailer. So then I put my bike on the side of the road underneath a street lamp, and then about 50 meters earlier, I stood underneath another street lamp. And then when I finally saw her, which was, I don't know, felt like forever, but maybe 45 minutes later, I was waving my arms and everything, but she didn't see me. But then she eventually stopped because she saw my bike. So, but anyways, so the first night we just parked in some random parking lot in a small town in Pennsylvania, and spent the night.
And that's how you knew you were gone.
Yeah. It was. I guess so. Yeah.
And how did you have an itinerary? Did you have a plan about where you were headed, or was it just south?
So my wife had done a lot of research about living full time, and we did make a bunch of reservations ahead of time, like months in advance, because this being our first time out, we weren't sure how good we would be at, finding places on the fly, right? And normally, especially in Canada, when one thinks of RVing, and they think, we would go to a provincial park or maybe a private campground like a KOA or something, and stay there overnight and camp, and that would be sort of the lifestyle. But we were looking for something a little more less pedestrian than that, right? And with the research that she had done, she found out that something called travel fatigue is a common problem. So what that means is, after a while, you just get so sick of traveling that you don't want to go anywhere. The motivation is low, and you just like, I want to stay here, and not move for a while, right?
Yeah.
Kind of like you're overdoing it type of thing. So we had made reservations for, a month at a time here, a couple of weeks at a time there. So we had a rough itinerary. And for example, our first long stay was in a small island off the coast of Georgia called Jekyll Island. We stayed there for a month, which was perfect because, I think it took us a while to get there. And we stopped off at a friend of ours' place, Jeff's, for a week in North Carolina. Actually, Jeff is a quite an interesting character, and shout out to Jeff. Hey, how's it going? But he's a Canadian that lived in the U.S. that went back to Canada and then went back to the U.S. So he owned some. He had recently bought a place with some land, so we camped there for a week. Then we went down to Georgia for a while, and we were able to sort of catch our breath and say, okay, we've been on the road now a couple of weeks. What do we need to set up? Are we missing anything? And we were actually, we did stuff like order stuff from Amazon and to sort of for things that we had missed or that would make our lives better or easier.
It's funny. I hear the effort this takes and the complexity of doing it in a civilized way, and I wonder when, because it must have happened that the moment when your heart was just exploding with joy that you were out there, and it was finally happening. Was there where were you, and what was that a tipping point, if you like?
So I would say that that finalization happened when we landed in Jekyll Island, Georgia, because that actually was a campground, but there were palm trees there. We don't get palm trees in Ontario, and we stayed there for a month, and we're like, wow. I had to stop and, well, I do this all the time, but take a few steps back and got a picture of the motorcycle and the RV surrounded by these palm trees, because that was our campsite. So that was when it sort of hit us, or hit me.
Yeah. And was sharing your experience on social media, was that kind of part of the plan all along, or did you kind of decide to do it while you were in the middle of it?
No, I've been on Facebook for a while, and Instagram as well. So I just continued to do my thing, take pictures and post them, because it was fun. So I wouldn't say it was a goal or something that I started to do because of it. It was just a continuation.
Mm. Interesting, because there are lots of people who do less less complicated and daring things who kind of become stars in those spaces. It's almost like you've been kind of reserved about that, like a real Canadian. Is that a conscious choice, or...
Well, I don't know. That's I'll say it again, a good question. But I felt like I didn't want to oversaturate my social media feed with too many pictures. As well, I didn't want to gloat about my lifestyle, because people are live their everyday lives, and I didn't want the message to come across as, hey, my life is so great, look at all the stuff I'm doing. So then I didn't want to overshare things. And as well, like especially when we were newly on the road, things happen every day, all the time.
Right.
And if I posted everything that was like new and interesting to me, it'd be crazy. Right. And so I didn't want to, because if I oversaturated it, then people would be bored and stop following me. Right.
Yeah.
And because things were happening so fast, I kind of fell behind with posting things. And then you kind of get into this little funk, which, by the way, I'm still in today, where you're like, oh, this cool thing happened to me, I want to post it. But then you're like, oh, but then I still have to post the thing that happened last week. Right. And then if I posted the thing that happened today, then it wouldn't make sense when I posted the thing about the picture I took last week. So I'm just not going to post anything.
I so identify with that. So
it's kind of like a vicious cycle.
Yeah, I get it. I do. I feel exactly the same way about social media. It's like if I'm having a really good day, I feel like I'd be a jerk to brag about it. If I'm having a bad day, I'd rather just keep it to myself. Maybe it's a generational thing. Yeah, and I will say, just as an asterisk, that I hope as your journeys continue that you'll get a little bit less shy about that, because I love seeing where you are in a given week. So
thank you.
Absolutely. So speaking of which, you did some pretty big miles this year. You sent me a map that showed that you'd been as far north as the Arctic Ocean and as far south as the tip of the Baja, and it looked like at least one lap of the U.S. and one time across Canada. So that's lots of time in the saddle. I'm curious to know what you think about when you're out there. I mean, it must have been a little bit different when you were, being accompanied, and we've foreshadowed that comes to an end at some point, and we'll talk about that in a second, but maybe it's different after you were truly on your own. But nonetheless, I'm and forgive the long rambling question, but I'm curious to know what goes through your head when you're spending that kind of time in the saddle.
It, oh man, I should have prepared this question ahead of time. First of all, is what's in my mind right now. But yeah, it's hard to say. Like a lot of things go through my mind, and some things are stupid and mundane. Like I'll, I'm embarrassed to say this because but I'll say it anyways. Sometimes I'm like singing in my head or singing out loud in my helmet because I have this stupid song in my head. And then maybe I'll change the lyrics to something that makes more sense to me because I'm riding through the prairies or whatever.
Right.
Sometimes I'm thinking about, just making it to my destination because it's been a really long day and boy, I just can't wait to get off the bike. Or maybe I'm thinking about, something that's been heavy on my mind. But it depends a lot on where I'm riding through. Like if I'm on the interstate or a highway like the 401 or something, that's just brutal. That's the worst kind of ride. And I'm sure you would agree with that.
Yep.
So oftentimes I'm just, by the way, I don't listen to music when I ride. That's just something that I, for whatever reason, don't do. But I'll look at my GPS, and I'll say, how long till the next turn? Or,
right.
When's the next exit? Or, I play a game where I'm like, okay, so there's like 87 kilometers to my next exit. So how long would that take in time? Type of thing. And then I'd calculate, based on my speed or whatever, how long it might take. And, sometimes I think about my friends, my family. But if I'm traveling with, in nature, and when I say nature, I mean like places that have like a lot of trees or plants or scenery, I guess you could say, then I am very much in the moment, in those, and I'll say that's my happiest place. And, a lot of the reason why I love riding and doing what I do. For example, when I was riding through the Canadian Rocky Mountains, I was just like, my mouth was agape, just looking at the mountains. I'm riding, and I'm just looking everywhere, and they are just so beautiful. And I'm just thinking to myself, how lucky am I to be here at this moment, right now. And the weather is perfect. And it was just so amazing. And anyways, all that to say, when I'm riding through scenery and nature, I just try to take that in as much as I can.
Yeah. Do you find that you've gotten better at being in the moment for all the riding you've done, or did you always have that ability?
I would say I've always been pretty good at that. I'm more of a in the moment person. Yeah.
Just to change gears slightly, I have heard and read remarkably often that one of the best things about long distance motorcycle travel is that it restores your faith in people. Jeff Hill, I think, wrote that it is one of the main reasons he does it. Is, he would otherwise be an irredeemable pessimist. But I think I've heard it. I could think of a half a dozen places at least. People who come back and say it isn't just what I saw, and it isn't even just who I met, but it's that I believed in people again. And I'm thinking about you and the kind of rational person that it takes to be an engineer, and the kind of a rules-based environment that you worked in, and and the fact that the road tugged at you a little bit. So I'm especially curious to know whether that has been your experience. Has being on the road restored your faith in humanity?
Oh, 1,000% true. I mean, I've met so many amazing people on the road. Even when I was traveling mainly with my support vehicle, if you will, met an amazing group of RVers. I traveled with people from, kind of as a fluid group. Sometimes you would travel here with these group of people, then other people would join you, then some people would leave, and then you would travel with other people to another place, etc. It's been amazing, and even more so, traveling solo on the motorcycle,
right,
has definitely restored my faith in humanity, and just people you would it's interesting. Like, if you were to think about who your friend group is today, or even yesterday, if you will, people don't often stay in one spot for their whole life. Like in some point of your life, people tend to move away. So, I ended up, even before I hit the road, having friends, in say Vancouver, in California, in Florida, and whatnot. So, I guess this is a bit kind of getting ahead of myself here, but we were able to visit friends and see them, and they were, our friends that we haven't seen for a little while have always been very supportive of what we were doing, and have been almost cheerleaders, if you will, right?
Yeah.
So it was great to see them after a while. But anyways, let me rewind. So since I've been on the bike and traveling by myself, seeing the good in people has even multiplied, because so I might as well. Well, so in March, what happened was I was separated with my wife, and that's the point at which I took whatever I could carry on my bike, put it on my bike, and then hit the road. And I visited friends for the first couple months, and shout out to my friends in the West Coast, especially Aliki of Venom Sport. She's originally from the Toronto area, but she put me up for a few weeks. And she's awesome. She said to me, she's like, I'm not really good at the sensitive stuff, but come here and we'll do some stupid stuff. Right. And so she delivered on her promise. We did a lot of stupid stuff, but you know what? It was a lot of fun. We went to MotoGP, met some racers, and anyways, that could be a whole other story. So, super supportive. And, then I went up the coast and met with some other friends. I landed in Langley, BC, which is just outside of Vancouver.
Yep.
And stay with my friend Alex, who's also from Toronto, and stayed with her for a few weeks. And actually she was in school to be a therapist. So I'm like, so she was like the best person that I could be spending time with at this point. Right.
Right.
But she was great. She put me up, and I could say story after story of people. And also just wanted to give another shout out to someone named Z Traveler. I don't know if I think you've heard of her.
Yep.
But she's taken over administration of this group called Bunk a Biker on Facebook. And so Bunk a Biker is a network of people that of other bikers that will have a place for people to lay their head, if you will, if they're on a motorcycle road trip. So there's a map that says, I have tent space available only, or I have tools you can use, or I've got a couch, or I've got a spare room and tent space if you want, just various types of amenities, if you will. So I've used that Bunka Biker network several times, and it not only just saves money, which is the first thought that came to mind when I started using it, but
right.
Really these people are more than just putting you up. They provide a lot of information about what's good to see in this area, what good roads are, or local restaurants if you're into trying the local fare.
Yeah.
And just talk about road trip stories, because it's always good to, motorcyclists, what do they like to talk about when they're together?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Right. So So anyways,
So your timing's perfect, because I was going to kind of go there next. You and your wife separated after 25 years together, which is a big loss, and I gather it's still pretty fresh. And we don't need to obviously get into any of the personal stuff, but I am curious that when that moment came, you didn't go home. I mean, if I have the story right, she was the one that convinced you to do this. When the sort of moment of truth arrived, you saddled up. How did that happen?
Well, I guess it was sort of a pride thing, because I didn't want to just pack up and go straight back to Toronto, where I'm from, with my tail between my legs, right? And I kind of wanted to make a statement to say, I could, what? I don't need you. I can do this on my own.
Right.
And even though I'm just on my bike, watch me, right? So that was kind of my attitude. And at the time, I told myself, or I told my friends, you know what? My life is actually like a really bad country song. Like, I lost my truck.
Yeah.
I lost my trailer.
Yeah.
I lost my wife, and I lost my dog.
Right.
So
yeah.
It was a bad country song, but I wanted to prove to, I guess, her, the world, myself, that I could do this. So so I gave it my best shot.
Was there any doubt in your mind? I mean, did you have to think about this, or was it a automatic decision?
It was just an automatic decision. I'm like, okay, all right, I'm just going to hit the road with my bike, and I did. There was no questions in my mind about could I do it, because I knew I could. It was just a matter of where and how.
Right. I have to wonder, whether the traveling you had done up to that point, played a role in that choice. I mean, it's hard not to see this as a kind of metaphor, right? I mean, you're on the same journey, and then you're not on the same journey. Did the fact that you had a taste of this, did that tip the scale at all, or was this just destiny?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. Because I had the experience of, at the time, 2.5 years on the road. I knew I could do it. It'd just be a little bit different and a lot more challenging, because I don't have a roof over my head. So that was a challenge that I had to figure out. But yeah. Yeah. So sorry, getting back to your point. It's just, definitely the experience that I had being on the road, wanted me to stay on the road, because, it's just so exciting. So many things to see, so many things to experience in life before I get too old and I can't. And again, I didn't want to just go back to Toronto with my tail between my legs, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to see this as a kind of one door closes, another one opens kind of moment, but it's not obviously for me to say, but I think it's significant that you doubled down, and then you went on to have a spectacular year, mileage wise. You said a second ago that you knew it would be different, and you shared an Instagram post with me in which you said, among other things, my travels since then on the motorcycle have been truly epic, and I did it only for myself. And I'm curious to hear you talk more about that. How has being alone changed the experience?
It's like night and day. It is, you get a huge sense of accomplishment every day, just knowing that what you saw or what you did that day was all because of your own decisions and what led up to that moment. Sorry, what was your question again?
You talked about how your travels have been epic since you've been solo, and that you're doing it just for yourself. which I thought was kind of a
Right.
powerful choice of words.
Oh yeah. So I think I mentioned earlier that I felt like I had something to prove to her and myself and the world, that I could do it myself. And now that I was truly by myself, that that became like more so true. Like I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yeah.
yeah, it almost became a challenge to myself to do and see things on the road, on the bike, by myself.
And are you the kind of person who needs a challenge, or are you like me, who's the kind of person who forces himself to have a challenge because otherwise he'd sit on the couch? Which kind of person are you?
Wow. I'm a little bit of both, to be honest. And I'll be the first to say, first of all, that I'm a terrible decision maker. It takes me forever to decide to do anything. I kind of need all the information ahead of time. And then I'll be like, okay, I'll choose B. I'll take decision B. And then 5 minutes later, I'm like, oh, I made the wrong decision. So then I'll do A. So anyways, so traveling by myself, that has actually been a real challenge, never knowing what to do. But
right.
Anyways, so, am I the type of person to sit back? Well, I mean, I am definitely, as I said, I like to live in the moment. So whatever's happening in front of me, I'll enjoy, and I can have a good time, whether I'm sitting down or if I'm doing something. But sort of a motto that I sort of took on over the last couple of years is, always choose adventure. If you have two options and one is a safe choice and one is the one that has a bigger payout but might be harder, choose a harder one.
Right.
Because the payout is higher, and as I said, tomorrow is never promised. But in choosing adventure over not choosing something boring, then you're definitely going to have the boring option if you don't choose adventure.
Right.
And and comfort zone is on my mind at times. And to me, and another thing that I think about is personal growth only happens outside of your comfort zone. And outside of your comfort zone is where things are a little bit scary. But that's kind of where you have to be in order to experience new things and to grow. So I guess, sometimes I'm a little bit of, not wanting to do things and stay home and sit on the couch. But, when I'm traveling, I definitely like to choose adventure.
Yeah.
And, sometimes that doesn't turn out so good, but sometimes it turns out really, really good.
Yeah, and I hear that so often from people who've, taken long journeys of one kind or another. I remember Kendall Wright, who I think talking about, just go and you'll figure it out while you're out there. And Jeff Hill kind of said something similar. And when I interviewed Melanie Copeland, back in the spring, she said, you have to put yourself in a position where you just don't have a choice. And I get this feeling talking to riders that people who go looking for trouble to see how bad it can get and how effectively they can get out of it are kind of a minority. They're sort of a 1 in 4. And the other 3 are like you just described, or like the people I've just quoted, who sort of say, I'm going to make a choice to make this difficult. Because I think I'll have a better life. Would that be? Would you put yourself in that group? And do you think that's a fair? Do you think that's a fair set of categories?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really think of it in that way. I just think of it as, for me, how do I want to live my life, right? And to me, I still want to live my life on the road. And while I'm on the road, I want to see and do things. So, you know, I'm not quite sure how to answer that question, because I don't choose things just because they're more difficult,
right,
and I want to see how I'm going to solve that problem. I just do things because they sound good to me at the time.
Right. Well, fair enough. And actually, I think you probably already answered that question. Tell me about your road name, Wobbly Cat. How did that come to pass, and what's the significance of it?
So what I'd like to say is it's really deep and meaningful, but what I will say is it's actually really not. So when I started working right out of university at IBM, I was actually a techie guy, and started with a bunch of other technical people, and we started our own secret, IRC chat room on a secret server or whatever. And anyways, so we all called ourselves by our names. So I was James, and then not too long after that, we went to our first kickoff meeting. And you've been in the corporate world for a while, so
yeah.
you know that there's a tons of what I would call management speak that goes on there. We're going to take it to market. We're going to hit the ground running. We're going to synergize.
Right.
And we got to be best of breed, and all these $20 words, right? So so then I went, when the kickoff was over, I went back, to the chat room, and I said, I changed my name to Bob, and I'm like, I'm Bob now because I'm best of breed, right? And so then the next day, I think I had a bad day or whatever, and I'm like, you know what, guys, I'm Wob now. I'm the worst of breed. So then it became Wob, and then I liked cats, and then it just morphed into Wobbly Cat, and it kind of stuck. And at the time as well, the internet forums were exploding, and every time I signed up for one, guess what? Wobbly Cat was available. So I always signed up as Wobbly Cat. And then Facebook came along, and I got an invite from a bunch of my motorcycle friends, and I was on GTA Motorcycle as Wobbly Cat. So then I just did Wobbly Cat, and then it just stuck. And it turns out another side effect or side benefit of a name like Wobbly Cat is people remember it. So then I just kept it.
It sort of fits. I mean, I think it's actually the name of a disease as well, which is awkward, but because I looked it up. But
yeah, it's feline hypoplasia.
Right.
And yeah.
No, it's total red herring.
By the way, I took it one step further, and I actually have Wobbly as my license plate.
Oh, nice. Well, I kind of liked it because it sort of goes back to the conversation we had earlier. There's something modest about it that appeals to my, Canadian nature. It's not like Jixer Dude or whatever. So I like it, but I was curious to know where it came from, and I like that it has authentic roots. It's awesome. Let's talk a bit about how being a nomad works on a practical level, because I'm sure that I'm not alone in being curious about that. And I kind of want to start with your choice of bike. Now, if I'm not mistaken, you're riding a CB500X, is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. So I think of that as a super reliable and competent motorcycle, but not a romantic motorcycle. And now that I know you're an engineer, I feel like I've got half my answer already. But it feels like a bike for somebody who's practical and has nothing to prove. I'm curious to know what led you to that choice, and whether you think that I've fairly assessed your bike.
So you'd be surprised at the number of chicks that I pick up because of my ride. Kidding? No, that is so not true. So before we hit the road, I had a CBR 1000 RR, and that thing was super fun, super fast, but so not practical for the road. So I wanted to get something that was a little more practical, and something that could have a passenger, my wife at the time, something that was easy to ride, and something that was small and not too heavy. That because we knew we'd be doing a lot of camping, so we would be around a lot of uneven ground. So something I could push around by hand without too much difficulty. So after test riding a bunch of things, the CB500 sort of was at the top of the list, and practical.
Right.
I guess it's like the minivan on a motorcycle world. I don't know, but
that would be
it turned out to be a really great choice because it's like you said, super reliable. I've got I don't know exactly because it's in miles right now when I hit the States, but I'm pretty close to 100,000 miles, if not have gone over.
Wow.
And all I've done are regular maintenance, like oil change, air filter change, tires, chain sprockets, rad fluid, brake pads, and the usual stuff.
Yeah.
Nothing major has gone wrong with that thing.
And I'm curious to know how it's been. So especially now that you told me you had a CBR 1000R, I'm like, okay, guys getting off a leader bike. And I think that the CB500X is sort of 47 horsepower or something like that. Maybe 435 pounds wet. Looking at your route map, it doesn't look like you're afraid of freeways. So I'm just curious to know, kind of on behalf of other people, who might be thinking about middleweights, how has it actually been?
So the freeways and interstates are not the happy place for this bike. Definitely lacking on the horsepower and wind protection side of things. So I have to think about wanting to make passes. But where it is in its happy place is on secondary highways, on mildly gravel roads, I'll say. I've taken it up some pretty gnarly rocky roads where this bike has no place going. Right. And definitely dropped the bike a couple times, but that's okay. I've taken them on some pretty squirrely dirt roads where this bike was probably not designed, but it's the only bike I have. So what am I going to do? Right. But highway, not the happy place. Because there's a lot, like I said, a lot of wind. And so what happened this fall, so I left Toronto on October 30th. And you know what? It happened to be a really rainy, windy day. And I don't know if anybody's going to look this up in the weather archives or whatever, but it was super windy, super rainy. And my goal that day was to make it to Chatham to visit a friend of mine, and getting stuck behind 18-wheelers, getting splashed in their spray. You don't want to be there, right? So you want to pass them, but there are so many trucks using the 407 between here and Chatham. So I'm constantly, in the heavy rain and water spraying up, passing a lot of trucks. So what happens on a small bike like mine is, first of all, you get caught in the turbulence behind the truck, right?
Right.
And then you eventually got to change lanes to pass it. And then as you're approaching the rear wheels of the trailer, you kind of get sucked in towards towards the truck, which is kind of a scary thing. When you're going 120 in the rain on the 401, and there's, as you get sucked in, your front end feels a little bit loose or whatever. And then once you pass that, I don't know what it is, that dirty air, then you're passing the truck. And then as you approach the rear wheels of the truck part, then you kind of get pushed away because again, there's a little wall of air there. And so then once you push through that, then all of a sudden you're pushing your own air, and then you kind of get slowed down. So you got to hit the gas more. And then again, it's kind of scary because you're on the 401 during 120 in the heavy rain. So even in good conditions, you sort of have to plan your passes, and it's a bit buzzy on the handlebars. So anyways, as I said, not the happy place for that bike.
Yeah.
Sorry for the long story.
No, that's okay. I found that very interesting personally. Do you find it easy to avoid freeways?
depends. Like, for example, crossing Canada, there's basically only one game in town, and it's called the Trans-Canada Highway. So that part, I mean, I'm off the highway to visit different places, but for the most part, you kind of have to take that. I mean, you could go south through the U.S. if you wanted to, which I did for part of it. But I mean, it depends where you want to go. For me, I'm not afraid of interstate. It all depends where you want to go.
Yeah.
This fall, if you looked at my route, I kind of had to stay on it because it was cold. I wanted to get through the area as fast as possible. I don't want to be cold. But if I'm in an area and the weather's amenable, then yeah, I'll stick around and take more secondary roads if I can. Obviously, because it's more interesting.
Yeah. And what did you do to the bike to make it sort of fit for the purpose?
I put engine guards on for one thing, hand guards. I put aluminum panniers from their GV brand.
Right.
I got a top case first, actually, which doesn't match any of my side cases. It's a plastic GV one. Heated hand grips I put on there. I attached a USB power for my phone. I have a quad lock phone case for my phone, which I'm going to plug Eat Sleep Ride for you and for Eat Sleep Ride as well. Yeah. That I use to track my rides, and a GPS for obviously for my GPS. Trying to think what else. That would be the main things that I've done. Everything else is mostly stock.
Yeah.
Oh, and a taller windscreen, the Honda OEM tall windscreen.
Yeah, so no surprises there. Well, I must admit it's just been remarkable, or at least so it seems. And you've had to do you do your own maintenance on the road, or how does that work?
As much as I can. Depends what facilities I have available. But what I can tell you is I've changed my oil in the back of a Home Depot before. I've changed my chain and sprockets at a friend's place because he had all the tools, so I was able to do that myself. But I've actually, yeah, I bled the brakes, with the on Vancouver Island with the mountains behind me and the water on the other side. That was a kind of an interesting experience. I've changed brake pads, in a parking lot. Changed the fork seals at another friend's place. So, I mean, it all depends on what I have available and what needs to be done and what kind of time frame there is too. Because I've also paid for my chain and sprockets to be changed because I didn't have the tools or the time.
Yep. I get that. I've always been sort of curious about this. Riding constantly like that, or at least to me, it seems constantly. What's the effect on your skills and your riding style? I mean, do you get better over time, or do you just get more comfortable? How do you change as a rider living that life?
If you do a lot of interstate at a time, that does nothing for your riding skill. But the type of riding that I do, especially this summer, I did more off-roading. So that sort of I'm not a skilled dirt rider by any stretch of the imagination, but just by sheer exposure, you do get better. I actually, while I was spending time with my friend Aliki, we ended up doing a few track days at Laguna Seca, and I was able to take my little CB500X on Laguna Seca, took it down the corkscrew, did a few track days with that. And
awesome.
that was amazing. And I don't know, can I share a little story about that?
Absolutely, please.
Okay. So, a lot of, I was there flagging for California Superbike School. And instead of, compensating the flaggers, or as we call them, marshals here in Canada, they with money they compensate them with track time. So here the students are paying a lot of money to get a lot of great instruction on riding the track and, improving their skills on the bike. I was there with my friend Aliki and our friend Matt Last, who himself is an excellent rider, and so is Aliki. She rides with AFM and American Federation of Motorcyclists. And so Matt, he qualified for British Superbike, but instead of continuing his career as a racer, he actually works as currently a data engineer for a Moto2 team. So highly skilled, obviously. So here I am, at Laguna Seca at California Superbike School. Aliki brings her race bike, which both her and Matt are using separately. And, they go out on the track with me, and, they're showing me the markers, the braking markers, or, what line I should be taking, et cetera. And, so they take me around, I follow them for a couple laps, and then they fall behind them and follow me. And then they give me tips after we come back in after those laps. And, so here I am at Laguna Seca, riding track for free, getting personalized, professional, coaching. And I'm thinking, wow, this is so cool, so amazing. All that to say, so I my skills definitely leapfrogged that weekend. But yeah, I mean, to summarize your initial question, does my skills get better or worse or whatnot? It's easy to become complacent, especially if you're doing a lot of miles and you're just doing freeway. But by changing it up, doing different styles of riding and off-road, your skills definitely improve.
Yeah, which certainly argues for a versatile bike.
Yep.
So I guess the elephant in the room in a conversation like this is always, how do you afford it? And I think we've partly addressed that. But I think you wrote in a piece that you wrote for the Northern Ontario Tourism, you said, before heading out on a motorcycle road trip, the first thing I do is walk out to the tree in my backyard and pull off a few $100 bills. and then you follow by saying, if those haven't ripened yet, then some $50 or $20 bills will do just fine. Well, assuming that's not true, I can't help but be curious about how you actually pull this off. I mean, so you had resources when you left. Is it just a question of having a bank card, or is this a complicated part of life on the road, or is it simple? How does it all work?
So I still have the rental properties, that rental property business. So that is what bankrolls my ability to live. And what I'll say is, it is by normal people's standard, it is not a lot. But when you're living on the road, you can do things a little more affordably, like you're not eating out all the time. I don't have mortgage payments anymore, car payments or anything like that. So there's definitely you can be a lot more efficient with your money. Well, I suppose that can be true of anybody, right? If you tighten your belt line, so to speak. But it's the rental property income that sustains me.
Right. And this is so rude and intrusive, but I just know that people wonder about this. Your banking relationships still exist in Canada, and so that's how everything kind of practically gets paid for. You're not driving around with a bag of cash.
I
guess you have to say no.
Even if I did, the stack would be really small.
Yeah. Right.
But right. So I have my banking exists in Canada. With I don't know if people will find this interesting, but I bank with the Royal Bank of Canada, RBC, and you can open what's called a U.S.-based account, which is different than just a U.S. dollar account. And so that gives me a U.S.-based bank account, and I have an RBC U.S.-based credit card. So I use my U.S. credit card and my to pay for things, and I have the bank account there just to take out cash and to like in that particular account, the credit card, you have to have a U.S. based account to pay it. You can't just pay it from your Canadian account.
Right.
So it's a bit cumbersome, but I have to transfer from my Canadian bank account to my U.S. bank account to pay off my U.S. based credit card. But it works.
Yep. Interesting.
And I mean, there's a little bit of playing the market, so to speak, because with the Canadian dollar, the exchange rate always fluctuates. So you kind of keep a little closer eye on the exchange rate. And what I can say is, it's way more expensive living in the U.S. because you pay depending on the exchange rate, like a 30 to 35% tax on everything, because that's just the exchange.
Yep. Yeah, I know about that. You told me when we had an email exchange this week that you'd spent so far this year 91 nights overnight with your bike. And that sounded like a lot to me, but it's not all the nights. And so I'm wondering what you do the rest of the time. How does, and I think you told me that at least you began by staying in certain places for a length of time and then, moving on. So that accounts for some of it perhaps. But I'm just curious to know about the rhythm of your life now, 91 nights on the road. What happens the rest of the time?
So I'm going to correct you, and it's probably because I wasn't clear. The number 91 refers to the number of locations I spent with the bike, as opposed to nights.
Oh, okay.
So so let me quote the stats here. Out of this year so far, I've stayed at 104 different locations, and of those 104 locations, I've 91 of them were with the motorcycle. And so just to clarify that, for example, the reason why I put that number out there was because until March, I was living with my wife at the time in the RV, and for a couple of weeks or a month, I was traveling with my friend Aliki and Matt in an RV as well. So I do track of where I stay. I call it my travel log.
Right.
So just wanted to make that distinction. But in terms of my rhythm, so I'm always constantly traveling, and my vehicle is my motorcycle. So when I'm in travel mode, I spent a couple months this summer in Toronto, but so that would just be like a normal everyday type of accommodation situation. But I would usually go for, depending where I'm going, if I'm just traveling to a place, I'll get a place for the evening, and then the next morning pack up and head to the next place, and so on. But if I come to a place that I want to spend some time in, so this might be like the Rockies or New Orleans, right? It could be anywhere. Then I'll stay 2, 3, 4 nights. So it all depends what my goals are. If it's traveling, then it's just one night, and if it's in an area that I want to explore, then it's more.
Right. That sounds lovely, actually. I have the impression, you've been fairly clear that you have a lot of friends scattered around the continent. I'm wondering if you knew those people when you hit the road, or if some of those relationships happened as a result of your traveling.
A little bit of both. Well, mostly before travel, but a lot of people I meet through the Bunker Biker network as well. But definitely a couple of them I've met on the road. Yeah.
Is there a family of motorcycle nomads in some way? I recall hearing your voice on Motorcycles and Misfits. You were there with Z Traveler, and I was kind of surprised because it was like, no, he's a Toronto guy. What's he doing there? And I had the impression that you knew each other. Even though I have to say, I think your stories seem to me pretty different. I mean, she doesn't sound to me like a former engineer, software tech support person. She seems a little more like a rebel. Is this an instant brotherhood?
It definitely is. Like, Going back to your earlier question about, when you hit the road or live on the road, you you instantly get your faith back into humanity, right? And when you meet other moto nomads, it's like instant brotherhood and sisterhood. It's amazing. You both have, or you talk about issues you have on the road, or problems that you've had, and you're like, oh yeah, that happened to me too, or maybe you talk about different places that you want to see, or or one person talks about how they do something, and you're like, well, that's a better idea than mine, or actually I don't like that idea because of whatever, or I tried that, it doesn't work for me. But it definitely instant brother and sisterhood. When you meet other moto nomads, moto travelers. I had the opportunity to hang out with Z out in San Jose for a while. We had a lot of fun. There's another guy named AJ Novak. I met him through Z, and whenever I say her name, I want to say Zed, but she spells it Z-E-E.
Yeah, me too.
Anyways, AJ I met in San Jose, but you know what? Later in the summer, I had a beer with him in Whitehorse, Yukon. So, wow. How cool is that we can meet anywhere? I wouldn't say that there's an underground community. Well, okay, let's say this. So there's a Facebook group called Minimalist Motorcycle Vagabonds, or MMV. And I met Z and AJ through that group. So I don't know if you want to say that's the underground or whatever, but
Well, it kind of is. I mean, if it hadn't been for Z Traveler, I would never have known that this particular tribe of motorcyclists even existed, right? I mean, we think about long distance riders as being people who go on long trips and then come home. I think this is a pretty obscure, or, for me was a pretty obscure, little part of the culture, which I think is cool. And obviously it's won you over. I don't hear you strongly tempted to, come back here and buy a condo. I know you've done a little bit of travel writing. I saw a couple of pieces at least that you did for Northern Ontario Travel for their website. Is that something you'd like to do more of? Is there a book in you, maybe, or a film? Is there some urge to tell your story that might be developing?
That's a question that I get often. Like, do you have a blog somewhere, or you better be writing a book because your life sounds awesome, or, you should start a YouTube channel or whatever. But, I don't know. First of all, if anybody wants to follow me and make a video about my life and my travels, let me know. Just, inbox me at WobblyCat on Instagram.
Right.
But in terms of making my own videos, to me, that sounds like a lot of work, and not something at this point I'm super interested in doing. I mean, I've toyed around with the idea, but I'd rather live my life more than documenting it, which, may also explain why I'm so behind on my Instagram and Facebook social media, in terms of where I am, right? But in terms of writing a book, that would be, I would love to do that, but I don't know. Maybe I'll say maybe. But it's not my current plan. I do like writing. This summer, I did a few articles for, like you said, Northern Ontario, for Ontario Tourism. But it was actually hard writing those articles. I ran into a bit of a writer's block. I guess a lot of things were on my mind or whatnot. But I don't know. So yeah. I will say maybe.
Yeah. Well, you're not alone. There's nothing more terrifying than a blank page, and I think if you get the urge, you'll know. But I find the Yep.
Sorry, I want to mention. I just came to mind here. In addition to MMV, with regards to finding people who live on the road, another another well-known group is Horizons Unlimited.
Yes.
So I haven't participated a lot in that or gone to any of the meets, but that's definitely another resource that people who spend a lot of time on their motorcycles, or if not, are nomads on their motorcycles, is a great resource.
Yeah, I hear good things. It's come up a couple of times in my conversations with other guests. I was just going to say, to sort of close out the other thought, there's something kind of irresistible to me about the fact that you aren't just a guy who hit the road because he couldn't function in society. You're a guy who lived in great big air quotes, normal life, and then decided to hit the road. And I have a feeling that that's going to fascinate a lot of people. So I hope the urge comes. So I have to ask.
Thank you.
You're more than welcome. I have to ask, since I don't know too many people with the experience you've had. It's kind of a touristy question, but what is the one road in North America you think everybody ought to ride at least once?
One road. Wow, that is a super hard question to answer, because there are so many different variables. Like, if you want to see the country, or if you want a variety of scenery, then you might want to hit the Trans-Canada Highway, because it's long and it takes you to a lot of different places. But when I went from Toronto to Vancouver, it was a real eye-opening experience. Like, at the end of that, I felt like every Canadian should do this, see their own country, see how diverse it is, how beautiful it is, how many different, what I'll call cultures or subcultures there are in Canada. You can hear the accents change, almost day to day.
It's true.
And you appreciate the country so much more, right? Like, I don't know if you've ever been in Saskatchewan and stopped and did a 360-degree turn.
Yep.
And you see the horizon the whole time. That can happen in Canada. Yep. It's called Saskatchewan. Yep. But that was amazing for me. For other mountain views, so I talked about it a little bit, Icefields Parkway. That was mind-blowing for me. Coming the ride from Lake Louise to Jasper. Oh my gosh. Like, I stopped and my mouth, as I said, was like, my jaw fell open. And honestly, like, it was an emotional experience for me. Like, it was incredible to see mountains like all around like that, like the jagged peaks, the snow caps. Like, when you think of mountains, or what you have in mind, and the lakes along that, like Moraine Lake, Peyto Lake, Lake Louise, like all these things, like the beautiful turquoise water is amazing. They call it the Alaska Highway, but in northern BC is amazing, because you see so many large game animals on the road just from riding it. You can see bison, mountain sheep, caribou, deer, bear, grizzly, and black bears. More eagles than you can shake a stick at. That was amazing too. The road to Stewart, BC. Oh, that was incredible too. That place was so beautiful. Again, surrounded by mountains, twisty road, waterfalls, bald eagles, pristine wilderness. Alaska, oh my gosh, even outside of Canada, Valdez is amazing. Heading like Denali National Park, that place is incredible. I'm rambling. All this to say, there's so many places to see. My favorite place is northern. I'll call it the far north. And that includes Alaska, Yukon, northern BC, and Northwest Territories. It's so remote there. The places are so far in between, but because of that, like the nature and I'm running out of words to describe it. It's so amazing. You'll be riding around and so I'll tell you this one story. Like, coming back from my trip to the Arctic Ocean, heading south from Inuvik, Northwest Territories, riding my motorcycle on the Dempster Highway. And then I see this, the highway has like a swath of land on either side where they cut down the trees and keep it, the vegetation low. So, animals don't just pop out and then hit, onto the road and you hit them, right? So there's like a wide swath. So I see an animal ahead climb up out of the clearing and onto the highway. And then I caught up to it, and it was a caribou.
Wow.
And so then he looked behind. Sorry, I don't know if it was a he or she. The caribou looked behind, saw me, kind of like, "Oh, you're there," and then started running a little bit faster. And then, a few seconds later, would slow down to a lope, look behind. "Oh, you're still there." Speed up, and then slow down slowly, and then look behind. "Oh, you're still there." Right. Did that a few times, and then I'm like, "Oh, I don't want to be harassing him or her, so I'm just going to stop." So then I stopped, and then continued jogging along, and then looked behind. I wasn't there, and then eventually ran off the road, and then went to the other side. And then at that moment, I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I just rode with a caribou for like a kilometer in the Arctic." Like, how cool is that? And it's just like one of those amazing moments that you never forget. And unfortunately, I didn't have my GoPro with me, so I didn't capture that moment. I swear it's not a fish is this big story. It actually happened. But the Dempster Highway itself is so beautiful as well. And like I said, you never know what kind of wildlife you'll see in the far north. And there's just something special about it there, and the people there are so incredible as well.
Yeah, I've heard that before, and it's interesting to me that you didn't immediately leap to the Tail of the Dragon or the PCH or any of the kind of more established bucket list roads. That's cool.
Well, I mean, those are ones that I would say they're amazing. Definitely go do them. But these ones are, I would say, more special to me. So.
Yep. No, I get it. Or at least I get it as much as I can get it without having been there. It does sound really special. I think there are probably a lot of riders, a lot of people listening to this who, have days when living on the road seems like a great idea. And there are probably a few of them who've seriously considered it, and maybe a tiny minority who would actually do it. I'm curious to know, what would you say to a listener out there who's scratching their chin right now and saying, I think I could do this? What would you say to them?
I would say, give it a try. Don't do it with your, eyes closed. Definitely, look into it. One thing I think is human. I don't know if it's human nature. It's first world nature, I'll say, is people think you need to have all the right gear.
Yeah.
So you have to buy a BMW 1250 GSA. You have to farkle it out, as they say. You have to have the most expensive climb gear. You have to, have the best, latest, greatest sleeping bag and North Face tent or whatever, right? No. I mean, just, we mentioned Z Traveler. She doesn't have all these fancy things, and you can definitely be a motorcycle nomad without getting all the fancy gear first.
Yeah.
So I would say, let me rewind a bit here and call myself out. I have climb gear, right? I don't have a fancy BMW motorcycle. I have a cobbled together tent, but still, when I say cobbled together, it's like an old North Face tent with a mountain equipment co-op fly, because the original fly disintegrated, and then I've got a repaired tent pole. So all that to say, it still works. Don't get caught up in all the gear. And the thing about riding on a motorcycle for me now is I still love the roads and the riding experience, right? Like that for me will never go away. Mm-hmm. But it's also more about the the experience of things. Like I would rather, instead of hitting all the roads and doing, I travel slow compared to what most people think of, right? They're like, oh, I mean, you're still there. You're only there. You've been there like, you've been moving for like 2 weeks or whatever, and you've only gone so far. I'm like, well, yeah, because, as a nomad, I don't have to be back at any given time, right? If I want to stay longer, I'll stay longer. So, definitely don't overplan your route is a big one. So, people have a lot of ambitious miles that they want to cover, but that'll get tiring fast. And I would rather have an enjoyable experience, stop at a couple places, go for a hike, swim in that lake, meet some people at a diner or whatever, or sorry, these are more answers or advice after you hit the road. But if you're thinking about hitting the road, definitely sort of think about your expenses, and then just the normal stuff to consider, right?
Yeah.
But it's totally doable. And if you're not 100% sure, then store your stuff and do it for 6 months. It doesn't have to be a whole life change.
Right.
If you don't like it after 3 months, well, then you can go back.
Yep.
So yeah.
Yeah, no, but I think what I hear you saying is that it's not a trip, it's a way of life, and you have to sort of approach it that way, and that includes, not worrying so much about pace. I mean, that makes perfect sense to me. I don't know if doing it makes perfect sense to me, but it makes perfect sense. Would you say that you're a different person now than when you started? Pardon me, than when you started all this, or are you the same guy?
Oh, yeah. Inside, I'm definitely the same guy. I mean, I didn't trade the old James or old Wildly Canyon and then get a new one, right? I still enjoy, the motorcycle experience and stuff like that. But what's really changed is my viewpoint about people, my viewpoint about consumerism, my viewpoint about more with less, and my viewpoint about experiences. So I saw a post on Facebook last week, and someone was mentioning about minimalism and what was it now? Like before you buy something, you really think about it and stuff like that. And I was like, I had to really downsize when I moved into my motorcycle. So, doing more with less, you kind of have to. And then you realize that, what, I am super happy, and I don't have, all the latest, greatest tech things or latest, greatest motorcycle or whatever. And while you're, and I sorry, I don't mean to be judgmental, but while people are slaving away at their jobs, and then they have a fancy car and a nice house and all this stuff, I have no car, and my what some people would consider my entry level motorcycle, but I'm enjoying life.
Well, yeah, that it's funny. I saw something go by on Instagram the other day that reminds me a bit about what you just said. One of those pieces of disposable wisdom that people share, and it said, look around at all that stuff. It used to be money, and that money used to be time. And I thought, well, I'm going to remember that, even though it's internet wisdom. it sort of echoes, I think, what you were just.
Yeah, I saw the same thing, and I'm like, 100%.
So I was going to ask you next, do you have any regrets? But it sounds like the answer is no.
Well, do I have any regrets?
We'll confine this to the trip.
When I hit the road.
Right.
Sorry, what was that?
I said, we'll confine your answer to living on your motorcycle.
Oh, okay. Well, okay. So I used to, when I was having a bad day, ask myself, in the middle of the bad thing happening, what was the question now? Would you rather be doing this or would you rather be stuck in the office?
Right.
And there was only 2 times that I said, you know what, the office seems pretty good right about now, but only for a couple of days.
Right. I'm curious to know what the end game is. Is this do you have a plan, or is this a forever thing, or are you going to just decide when you decide, or how's the future look?
So this is definitely a for now thing. I don't think I could, in my 80s, be doing this lifestyle. So it is a for now thing. I have no plans really at this time to come off the road, but if I ever choose to come off the road, the end plan was to either sell off one of the rental properties or to move into one of the units. So I could definitely do it that way.
Right. So you've got a bit of a parachute if you need it. That's you were so
exactly.
smart.
That was all part of the long-term planning that we had,
Yeah.
right? Because we knew we would need an exit strategy. And that's another pearl of wisdom I kind of learned over through experience is, going off-road or going into an unknown area where it might be a little sketchy. So my thoughts are, this is for me because, traveling solo on a motorcycle carries a lot more risk. So I'm always thinking, before I have an entrance strategy, I need an exit strategy. So so there are a couple areas that, probably would have been okay if I took my bike through, but you know what? Do I really want to risk it? And there's a fine line between always choose adventure and being prudent. So sometimes I'm on one side versus the other.
Yeah. Well, and that strikes me as, so smart. I mean, I think there's probably no need to be self-destructive when we make these choices if you can avoid it. So I really identify with that. So where to next? I know you're in Toronto sort of on business, but where will we find you when you hit the road again?
So after Toronto, my bike is being stored with a friend in San Antonio, Texas. I've only been here for about a week and a bit. When I get back to San Antonio, my plan is to head into Mexico.
That sounds smart. Well,
not according to a lot of people. I've been getting a lot of feedback from people that they're like, "Are you sure? Are you sure it's really dangerous?" And I'm like, "Well, I mean, look at it this way. There's gang violence and shootings in America and Canada. There's in the U.S. there's school shootings, there's mass shootings, and there's other various types of crime that happen in Canada too. And it's only the bad news that makes it out of Mexico. So, given this information, would you actually rather go to Mexico or stay in the States or go to Canada?"
Yeah.
I don't know. I kind of, and it's warm.
Yeah. I hear that from experienced travelers all the time, that the world isn't the way it looks in the newspaper. So I meant it when I said that sounds smart. Well, look, James, we missed a chance to ride together this fall because I was sitting in a waiting room while my bike was being serviced because I'm a little less self-sufficient than you are, but I hope we'll get that chance again. And in the meantime, I just want to thank you for speaking with me today. I love your story, as you can probably tell, and it's clearly not over yet. So I hope you'll stay in touch.
Oh, Bruce, I've really enjoyed talking with you as well, and I feel that's sort of almost an anthem that all your guests say. But I've enjoyed this chat, and I wish we had more time. I have a lot more stories I could relate to you, or actually one time, one of your guests should interview you. that might be interesting too. But anyways,
I'm just
really enjoyed my time speaking with you.
I'm not that interesting, actually, but thank you.
Well, no, see, that's the thing, right? I never thought I was that interesting. Like, I'm just a guy, living my life, and I'm not remarkable in any sense of the word. I just chose a different path than other people.
Yeah. Well, I think when people hear you, they may differ. And I told you 90 minutes was going to fly by. Maybe we should circle back on this in a year or so, and let's see how things have gone.
Sure, I'd totally be open to that. And by the way, I'm flattered that you would want to talk to me on your podcast, because I know you've had a lot of really interesting and well-known people on here as well. So it's been quite the experience for me to be on here.
It's my pleasure, totally my pleasure. I appreciate your honesty, and as I say, I wish, as you do, that there was more time, but hopefully there will be. And in the meantime, ride safe out there. I hope we get to run into each other when the warmth comes back to Canada, and you can share some of those stories with me.
All right. Bye now.
Bye now. If I could do this interview over again, there is one other moment I would have asked James to describe, and that's the first time he got on his bike after finding himself on the road alone. In my correspondence with him before this interview, it was pretty clear that this year had been a pretty painful transition for him, more so than maybe he let on here. He wrote about the months that followed as terrible and epic. But interestingly, he called the experience the natural path for a motorcyclist, and remembered most vividly the incredible people and beautiful places that he saw in the aftermath. And that got me wondering about the role that transitions play in our relationships with these machines. Not just how often people become riders after big changes in their lives, which is more often than you might think, but how often the motorcycle itself is a vehicle for those changes. Obviously, not every rider has a story like this, or needs to, but it's still striking to me how often a motorcycle is called upon to carry us when there seems to be no firm ground under our feet. That's how bikes came back into my life, to be honest. And ever since then, I've found myself reaching for the keys as a way of processing every ending and beginning I go through. Sure, a ride clears your head and calms you down, and sometimes that's enough, but I think there's something more to it. When I picture that first morning after James Bai suddenly found himself alone with no plan, it calls to mind a quote from the Motorcycle Diaries, one you've probably seen 100 times. It goes like this: "What do we leave behind when we cross each frontier? Each moment seems split in two, melancholy for what was left behind, and the excitement of entering a new land." Well, it's hard to be hopeless on a motorcycle, and it's hard not to be excited about where you're going, even if that happens to be nowhere in particular. And maybe then, most of all. Well, thanks for listening. You'll find show notes for this episode at thismotorcyclelife.com, and I'll include some links that James has shared with me about life on the road and how to make it work. That's also how you can reach me if you have questions, comments, or suggestions. Emailing me at thismotorcyclelife@gmail.com works too, and I promise I'll write you back. You can also follow me on Instagram, where I like to post pictures of bikes I find on the street, among other things, and where you can follow a lot of the people I've interviewed for this podcast, including Wobbly Cat. This episode's playlist recommendation is performed by Australian blues artist Owen Campbell. It's a cover of an old Tom Waits favorite that I think both suits Campbell's Townes Van Zandt sound and the theme of this episode. The track is called Old 55, and it evokes that feeling of a moment split in two better than anything I've ever heard. Buy it wherever you like to get your music, and in the meantime, keep staying alive out there.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Time went so quickly, I went lickety-splitly out to my old 55. Pulling away slowly, feeling so holy, God knows I was feeling like. And now the sun's coming up, riding with late love. The freeway cars and trucks, the stars beginning to fade, and I leave the parade, just wishing I'd stayed a little longer. Lord, that feeling's getting strong. Is it getting strong now?